Hello, welcome to Only for Your Ears, and welcome to today's episode 18, The Angel by Hans Christian Andersen, which I've renamed Beneath God's Divine Wings. The structure will be the same as usual, starting off with a summary that will highlight some of the most important points. Then we'll go into what I call my critical review with a little reflection and using the sentences from the summary to give examples or talk about films that remind me of a particular situation. Then we'll take a look at the trigger points. Now, when I talk about the trigger points that triggered me, these things that triggered me, later on, we'll talk about what the potential trigger points are for everybody else. But for now, we're just going to talk about the trigger points that affected me. So let's begin. Beneath God's divine wings. As soon as a good little child dies, one of God's angels descends on the earth, takes the dead child in his arms, spreads out his large white wings, and flies over all the places that were dear to the little one when alive. And on the way, he gathers a handful of flowers, which he then carries to heaven, in order that they may bloom still more beautifully there than they did on earth. The loving God pressed all his flowers to his bosom, but the flower that he loveth best he kissed, and then it receives a sweet, clear voice so that it can sing and rejoice with the happy hosts around. An angel of God related this as he bore a dead child to heaven. I digress. What a wonderful way to usher a young child into heaven through him recognizing all the good he did on earth. And the child heard as in a dream, and they flew over the spots around the home where the little one had played in its lifetime. And they passed through the gardens with the loveliest flowers. Which flower shall we take with us and plant afresh in heaven? Asked the angel. And a beautiful slender rose was standing there, but a rude hand had wantonly broken the stem, so that all the branches that a short time before were so fair and green, and which were full of large half-open rosebuds, now hung down quite withered and sad upon the soft, smooth carpet of turf. I digress. This person obviously didn't have a green thumb. The poor tree, said the child, take it so that it may bloom again on high with the loving God. And the angel took it and kissed the child. And the little one half opened his eyes. They gathered some of uh, the super flowers, but they took the despised daisies and wild pansies too. I digress. To see the world's beauty through the innocence of a child is remarkable. Now we have flowers, said the child, and the angel nodded as if to say yes, but they did not yet fly up to heaven. It was night. It was quite still. They stayed a while in the great city near which the child had lived. They floated to and fro in one of the narrowest streets where great heaps of straw of ashes and rubbish lay about. There had been a removal. The streets looked disordered and dirty. They lay broken pots and plates, plaster figures, rags, crowns of old hats, nothing but things that were displeasing to the sight. I digress. Maybe the boy came from a poor neighborhood and suffered amongst disease. And amidst the devastation, the angel pointed to the fragments of a flower pot and took a clod of earth that had fallen out of it, and which was only held together by roots of a great withered wildflower. But it was good for nothing now, and was therefore thrown out into the street. We will take that one with us, said the angel, and I will tell you about it while we're flying. And now they flew on, and the angel related, I digress, the loving and gentle guide, down yonder in the narrow streets, in the low cellar, lived once a poor sickly boy. He had been bedridden from his very infancy, for an incurable disease had seized upon his tender frame when it was very well indeed. He could just go a few times up and down the little room on his crutches. That was all. Some days in the summer, the sunbeams fell for half an hour on the cellar window, and then where the boy sat there and let the warm sunshine upon him and saw the red blood through his small, thin fingers. Then it was said, yes, he has been out today. All he knew of the wondrously beautiful springtime, the green and the beauty of the woods, was the first bough of a beech tree that a neighbor's son once brought him as a May Day token, and he held it over his head and dreamed he was under the green shelter of the beech trees, where the sun shone and the birds were singing around him. I digress. God had mercy on the boy and let him experience a wonderful vision of life, even for a brief moment. One day in spring, his neighbor's son brought him some flowers, some wildflowers also, and among them was by chance one with a root. It was therefore planted in a flower pot and placed in the window close to his bedside. And a fortunate hand had planted the flower. It thrived, put forth new shoots, and every year it bore sweet-smelling flowers. To the eyes of the sick boy, it became the most beautiful garden, his little treasure upon earth. He watered and tended it and took care that it got every sunbeam to the very last that glided by the lowest plane. And the flower grew up in his very dreams with its colors and its fragrance. It was overlooked by others, and for him alone it bloomed and smelt so sweetly. To it he turned in dying when the loving God called him to himself. He has now been a year with God. A year has the flower stood in the window, withered and forgotten, and now at the removal it has been thrown among the rubbish into the street. And that is the flower, the same poor faded flower which we have taken into our garland. But this flower has caused more joy than the rarest flower in the garden of a queen. I digress. Again, God's children are the most important treasures on earth and in life and in afterlife. But how do you know all this? Asked the child, whom the angel was carrying to heaven. I know it, said the angel. I was myself the sick little boy that went on crutches. I must surely know my own flower again. And the child opened his eyes and looked at the beautiful calm face of the angel, and at the same moment they were in heaven. where there was only joy and blessedness. I digress. Perfect, the ultimate cushion of trust and strength. And God pressed the dead child to his bosom. Thereon it became winged like the other angel, and flew hand in hand with him. And God pressed all the flowers to his bosom. But the poor withered flower he kissed, and a voice was given to it, and it sang a song of triumph with all the angels that moved around God in heaven, God sweeping on their bright wings, quite near to him, others round these in larger circles, always further away in the immensity, but all equally blessed. And they all sang, great and small, the good innocent little child who once limped about on the toilsome crutches, and the poor field flower that had lain withered among the sweepings in the narrow dingy street. I digress. This little boy is safe and sound in God's heavenly presence, surrounded by all the love he could ever wish for. What a wonderful, wonderful way to usher anybody into heaven, especially a small child. What a wonderful story. I liked that so much. It gave the child reassurance and an acceptance that even if he was dead, he was safe in God's arms. So let's go on to my critical review, and maybe a reflection and some examples. Let's take a look. So, I believe this heartwarming fairy tale has been designed to help any young person who fears life after death, which I believe is true of all of us, especially adults, because we are so aware of the cause and the effect of our actions in life. When you're a child, you're not aware of doing wrong. You always try to do good unless you're taught to do wrong. This is often referred to as karma. Life through an adult's eyes is filled with guilt, redemption, forgiveness, justice, and some kind of compensation. However, life through the eyes of a child is full of adventure, innocence, and the wisdom of an old soul. There has been a lot of talk and comparisons about angels and demons. And the more our society is convinced in afterlife and karma, we are obsessed with performing good deeds to graduate from this low vibrational planet. Yes, because unfortunately, this is quite a low vibrational planet called Earth. So we can redeem ourselves for any unfinished business or bad deeds we did without understanding the act of goodness is admired in heaven and why it is admired in heaven. When the fairy tale was written, I think it was easier to transition into heaven, even if this was referring to 2 centuries ago, than it is today. I don't know why. It's just a feeling because today's society is loaded with so many layers of nefarious options of toxic power. It's dangerous. Yes, this is very true. I think 2 centuries ago, I think it was easier. I think it was easier to ascend into heaven than it is today. We have so many choices. We have so many religious options. And yet, in spite of all those options that we have, we still decide to do what's considered not good against the will of either God or against karma. So let's continue. Let's take a look at number one. Let's begin with the first example. So the first example, these are about films. The first example, the film Michael with John Travolta playing the archangel Michael, is a good reminder that angels are sent to this planet to perform the type of miracles no human can. If a human could perform these type of miracles, they wouldn't be angels, I believe. I digress. As humans, if we were able to perform this type of miracle, we wouldn't have angels. Michael comes down on earth to restore faith and trust in love. The story opens with Michael staying at a boarding house of Pansy Milbank as a lodger. He has some unusual habits where a couple of newspaper journalists are sent to see if Michael is real. This is a really good comedy. I think it has a British actor called John Hoskins or something like that. It plays on the ideas that most of us would like to have, which are supernatural powers to change things for the better. I believe this is true. I think we all wish we had these supernatural powers. And in some cases, I think we do, but we're so into getting what's outside of us as opposed to going inside of us and really using the energies within our bodies. Anyway, the angel goes on a journey with the journalists to Chicago after Pansy unexpectedly dies. While in Chicago, Sparky the dog and the owner of the newspaper, the owner of the newspaper dies. Michael uses almost all his power to bring it back to life, and he is left weakened by this realization. Frank and Dorothy are the couple that Michael is supposed to reconnect as partners, but they decide to go their separate ways. So Michael tries one more time to bring them back together again one more time by bringing Pansy in tow. Michael finally gets the couple to see how important they are to each other, and they become one again. Now, I think this is a really good story, and it's really about love, and it has to do with forgiveness and being able to accept people for who they are while experiencing some of these human traits. Now, I don't recall ever seeing something like this in real life, but maybe I have. It was said that Robert Wagner and Natalie Wood, two film stars, were twin flames or soulmates. I think twin flames are slightly different. They were brought back together by a miracle. It was ill-fated several years later when she mysteriously drowns. However, I thought this was a good real-life example of what Michael did in the film. Yes, bringing two people back together. Now, Robert Wagner and Natalie Wood were the perfect Hollywood couple. And when they went for a divorce and got a divorce, people in Hollywood were absolutely devastated. They were considered the blueprint of Hollywood as far as a successful relationship. But even that, and in Hollywood, come on. This is not a real world anyway. It's a world full of fantasies. But they did get back together again. And maybe it was a miracle from God or within the universe, but then it ended really tragically. So let's take a look at the second example, and we have Ghost. Now, Ghost is one of my favorite kind of supernatural feel-good movies. Ghost is a wonderful supernatural film where Sam Wheat, played by Patrick Swayze, works on Wall Street with his best friend Carl Berner. Sam and his girlfriend Molly move into a Manhattan apartment. One night, Sam gets attacked by a mugger and accidentally gets murdered in a scuffle. I digress. Carl was stupid and hired a jerk as a professional out of desperation. No way, if this person was a professional, he wouldn't have killed Patrick Swayze's character. But that's what happens when you hire somebody that doesn't really know what they're doing and panics. Sam doesn't realize he's dead until angels try to pull him away, but he insists on getting back to Earth to protect his girlfriend from the man who killed him, even though he doesn't know who killed him. He doesn't know. He thinks the mugger is the one that killed him. Yes, he killed him accidentally, but the person that was plotting for this whole thing to go down was his best friend. You know what they say? Keep your enemies close, but your friends closer. But he insists on getting back to Earth to protect his girlfriend from the man who killed him. He hires a clairvoyant called Oda May, which is Whoopi Goldberg, to help protect Molly. Molly doesn't believe Oda May at first, but through Sam, she feeds her some information that she couldn't possibly know without Sam. The film takes a strange turn when Carl, Sam's friend, becomes desperate to obtain some numbers on Wall Street and tries to push himself on to Molly. He is boldly rejected and frustrated that he can't get his way. And at the end of the film, Sam knows he was murdered by mistake and that his friend was the ringleader. His friend was the real murderer. Sam, through the help of Oda, gets to touch and dance with his beloved Molly to say goodbye. His best friend Carl and the mugger go to hell and pay for their nefarious deeds, and Sam is finally ready to be guided to heaven with his angels. Oddly enough, I feel that in the end, Sam had already turned into an angel before the film came to a close, or before he went to heaven. He was the angel that said, no, I have to come back and do some things. I have to perform tasks that nobody else can do. And in that process, he became the angel even before he went up to heaven. There are a few real life examples to demonstrate something similar to ghosts, but the situation that comes to mind is the Dodi Fayed and the Princess Diana car crash that took place in, I think it was August of 1997 in the tunnel in France. Now, as I mean, a Muslim, Dodi Fayed was a Muslim, and in their religion, and it's the same way with Jews as well. When you die, within 24 hours, they bury you. So Muhammad al-Fayed, Dodi's father, buried his son and was absolutely devastated. But he went out of his way to bring closure to the investigation and find out what really took place. Now, soon after the accident, we got some information, and Dodi Fayed and Mohammed Fayed wasn't completely happy with the information that he was given, but at least he knew that, unfortunately, his son and his girlfriend got into a car, which unknowingly got into the car and didn't know that the driver was completely paralytic. I mean, he was paralytic drunk, and they did not know this. And 25 years later, the investigation is one of those unsolved mysteries. It's one of those unsolved mysteries where you get shards of precious information bit by bit. So every year you get more and more information, but it's really hard to get the whole information. But one of the things I think that Mohammed al-Fayed, because of the whole thing with Muslims and the bad reputation that has been framed in the lens of society, Muhammad fought like nobody's business to clear his son's name. And in the end, he was able to clear his son's name in the sense that he was killed in a car accident by a driver that was drunk, and he had nothing to do with it. And he died instantly in the car crash. Whereas Lady Diana died, I think, a couple of hours later with a punch at her heart. So that's the second one. Now, the third one is the devil's advocate. Well, the advocate for the devil, the person that fights for the devil. A perfect title. It's a thrilling example of an alluring taste in immorality, evil at its best, and narcissism. Al Pacino plays Lucifer, one of Satan's friends. John Milton is a high-powered cutthroat lawyer in Manhattan, and Kevin Lomax, played by Keanu Reeves, is just as equally cutthroat, who has never lost a case and never wants to lose, not ever. There's something to be said about winning and losing. When you win, you learn something, and when you lose, you learn something. But always wanting to win, there's something strange about that. Never wants to lose. Not ever. He would literally do anything to win. Only he presents himself by hiding. Pardon me. He presents himself by hiding behind great youthful looks. John asks Kevin to join his firm in Manhattan. He moves to New York with his wife Mary Ann, played by Charlize Theron. When he arrives at the firm, Kevin starts to spend most days and nights working, and of course his wife was neglected. Vanity and narcissism are Kevin's poison. Just like being cutthroat and nefarious is John's poison. Alice is Kevin's puritanical mother, suggests they all go home and talk it over and calm some ruffled feathers with when John and Kevin have a bit of a powwow, have a bit of an argument, but Kevin refuses. The next day, John assigns Kevin to the case of a billionaire, Alex Cullen, who is accused of multiple murders. Unfortunately, this case demands all the time, and Mary Ann barely sees her husband and has to deal with the firm's poisonous, cold, immoral partners and wives. Demands all of them. Okay. Barely sees her husband. Kevin begins to fantasize about his assistant, Christabella. Around this time, Mary Ann starts to see visions of partners' wives playing with her ovaries and demands they return home after a doctor renders her infertile. But Kevin refuses. Of course, Kevin would refuse. I digress, but of course, a narcissist like Kevin only has space and concern about themselves. John asks Kevin to step down from the case, but he refuses. And Eddie, the general manager, tries to persuade Kevin by saying that John doesn't care about anyone except himself. This information gets back to John, and later that night, Eddie is murdered in Central Park by demonic vagrants. Of course, these people are demonic. Mary Ann gets mentally ill after John tries to rape her, and Kevin refuses to accept despite the obvious evidence on her body. He just refuses. He wants the job and he wants to win. Mary Ann goes crazy and Kevin admits her to an institution where she ultimately commits suicide. Kevin wins the case in the most hateful way with lies, etc., manipulation. And Kevin finds out that John is his father. This is a really, it's just laden and thick with the type of gunk and ugliness that we've also been described as hell. That is hell, and it smells like rotten egg, and it's just dark and ugly. And heaven is bright and full of sunlight and purity. This is what we've been described. This is what has been described to us. Now, for a real life example, I will use my father performing obia to drive my narcissistic mother crazy so he could throw her into a mental health facility so he could get a quick annulment. This is true, people. This is absolutely true. My dad was desperate to get rid of my narcissistic mother. I don't blame him. I absolutely don't blame him. But what I am against is what he did. And I do believe that he is in a good place. He's dead now. I do believe that he is probably in heaven. And I think God, the angels, realized that this man was in a very desperate situation with a woman that just trapped him into in a marriage that he didn't want to be in. But he did use witchcraft to, how would I say it, to encourage her mental instability. She already had mental instability anyway. And if you have a personality disorder like narcissism, like Donald Trump, you have a mental and emotional instabilities, and usually you don't have any personality, which is really sad. So that's one of the examples that I can give. And people do, unfortunately, people in society do a lot of things with jealousy. If someone's jealous of you and there's a person that is very familiar with witchcraft and all types of evil things, they will do things like make you get ill, or, to make sure that you lose your talent or you can't use your talent anymore. So it's very, very scary. Okay, let's take a look. So we had Devil's Advocate. We had the Michael, and we also had another one, Ghost. So we've done the review. Okay, now let's finish off with the trigger points. So the trigger points is, now the only thing in the trigger points here, I don't really have a lot of trigger points, but I'm going to mention Lillian Board was engaged to a sports journalist. Now, Lillian Board was a very, very successful British runner who had cancer. She had cancer and she went to run in the Munich Olympic Games, even though she had cancer. And so she was engaged to a sports journalist, David Emery, um, while she was trying to battle cancer. And he stayed with her until the very, very end, healing, trying to heal her, trying to help her, being a human angel, you know, not an earth angel, a human angel, trying to be at her side no matter what, and trying to demonstrate the goodness that reflects or how we think of angels act in, in the supernatural way. So David Emery was there with her through the very end. And then he subsequently married her sister. Now, which is interesting because her and her sister were identical twins. They looked alike, they had the same shaped body and everything, except Lillian was the athlete. And her sister, her twin sister, loved designing clothes and loved making crafts. So she was very creative and Lillian was athletic. He ends up marrying her. Her name's Irene. So they ended up getting married. And I feel in a way that part of me, he still married Lillian because they look exactly the same. But he really married Irene. He really married Irene. He had they had children together, but he still, part of his heart was there and will always be there with Lillian. So I think he played very much like an angel and also her sister too. So David wouldn't be alone without her. Now, the second example, a trigger, I can't say it's a trigger, but it's about protection. This story doesn't really bring about triggers for me, actually. But since I've been here in Vancouver, I came to Vancouver at the end of August, and I remember feeling very, very hesitant about, coming to Vancouver. I wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do, but I did. And I remember one of the things that I felt Spirit said to me, get on the goddamn plane, Melody. You're not getting off this plane. And by the way, we will protect you. We will look after you. And I must say that since I've been here, in spite of everything, I have been protected. There's a lot that I should be grateful for. I think a counselor said to me the other day, she said, even if you go back to Spain, you won't be a failure because I've accomplished quite a lot of things here, including this podcast, which I'm so glad that I have people that view and listen. She said, what's interesting, and this is the miracle, people, this is the real miracle of this second situation, is that she said Vancouver is one of the worst places and the poorest places in North America with the drugs and everything. She said, most people just survive. He said, but you have thrived. You've actually thrived in a city where it's unheard of. And so I know that being able to thrive in this city, how she called it, that is the miracle coming from God and from the angels that most definitely protected me. And they have kept their word. I have been protected as much as I would like to complain. The last one is, I think, universal space technology, a miracle from above too. I believe Katherine Johnson, the mathematician, there's a film about Katherine Johnson called Hidden Figures. And she's a mathematician and she worked for NASA for really most of for her life. And she was incredibly respected. So Katherine Johnson, the mathematician, had worked for NASA and she turned the Apollo 13 program that was a complete and utter disaster because they did not know how to come back to Earth. They got lost. They got lost up there. It was a disaster. And she said, the only way that you will make it back is if you follow the stars, follow the reflection and the light of the stars, and the stars will bring you back. And that's exactly what they did. They followed her every word. Just follow the stars, and the stars will bring you back down to Earth. And that's exactly what happens. So instead of the Apollo 13 program being known in history as just a complete and utter disaster, it is known as a success because the miracle of the angels and of Katherine Johnson's words saying, follow the stars and the stars will bring you back. So those are my three examples of talking about my real life examples of protection, miracles, and angels. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode, people. Thank you very much for listening. Please, if you can, leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And also subscribe, share, and give me a thumbs up. Show me a bit of love, people. It'd be nice to have a bit of extra love. And I will leave you with my typical phrases. Healing is a lifelong blessing, lesson, and gift we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Healing is a lifelong lesson, blessing, and gift we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Goodbye. Take care.